What if your reflection in the polished steel of a surgical cabinet moved before you did, and then kept smiling when you stopped? What if a heart monitor's gentle beeping wasn't tracking a pulse at all, but counting you down? Welcome back to Whispering Abyss. Tonight, I brought 5 hospital stories that crawl under your skin and whisper your name through the vents. From elevators that arrive from sealed floors to chart notes that update themselves in red ink, every story here is a quiet alarm you can't reach to silence. Listen with the lights low, breathe with me, and when the last line lands, tell me in the comments which tale followed you into the mirror. Story 1. Bed 33 faces the wrong way every night. Bed 33 is found turned toward the wall, as if someone wants to sleep facing what no one else will look at. I work nights because silence lets me hear what patients hide behind their smiles. The vents hiss like someone breathing through their teeth. The waxed floor holds a faint lemon smell under the sharper bite of antiseptic. Lights hum in a way that settles between the ribs. If you have ever been in a hospital at 3 a.m., you know the feeling of being the only person awake in a building full of beating hearts. In Ward C, the heart of the place skips when Bed 33 turns its face away, like it is ashamed of whatever waits on the wall. They say I am too rational, too quick to label a shadow as a bad bulb. Maybe you need someone like that when alarms flicker at night. Maybe you also need a listener. My name is Clara. I am the nurse who ties her hair in the same knot and counts the same steps down the same corridor, because repetition can be a kind of spell. Tonight, the spell felt thin around the edges. There was a storm stitching itself to the windows, and somewhere in the building a cart will squeaked like it wanted attention, but no cart was signed out at this hour, which made me pause. I first noticed the bed on a Tuesday that had already stretched too long. Bed 33 should face the nurse's station like every other bed. It helps patients see help is nearby. But when I did rounds, the bed had pivoted to the wall, its headboard pointing right at the stainless cabinet. It takes effort to move a hospital bed, even unlocked. This one had both brakes set. The tiny red tabs clicked down as if someone had been careful about it. I turned it back, checked the locks, and let my hand rest on the rails. The rails were cold enough to sting, as if someone had been gripping them and wouldn't let the heat return. The patient in Bed 31, Mrs. Alvarez, watched me and whispered, "Do not talk to the woman who stands there." She pointed at the blank space beside 33, at the wall itself, as if words could bruise it. Her chart said she was oriented and calm. I smiled and asked who she meant because that is the job, but she would not point again. "She faces the wrong way," she said, and closed her eyes like the sentence tasted too strong. That should have been a story I told in the break room, the kind we laugh off when the coffee burns the tongue. But that night, as I noted vitals, the monitor in Bed 33 flickered even though it was off. Just a quick pulse of light, enough to show a number like a wink. 33. The display went dark again before I could call anyone over. I pressed the power. Nothing. The plug was seated. I told myself it was residual charge. I told myself a lot of things while the storm found a seam in the roof and sent a cold breath down the back of my neck. At 1:17 a.m., the wheels on Bed 33 clicked softly. Both brakes were down, but I heard it. It sounded like someone testing the bite of the lock. I can imitate that sound for you because I kept hearing it after that. Little clicks, spaced like a heartbeat, just under the threshold of logic. You know the way a faucet drips in another room and your ear starts timing it even when you want to stop? That is how the clicks lived with me, counting something I could not see. I made the mistake of mentioning the bed to Miguel, one of the porters. He has a grin that makes trouble look like a party. "Maybe someone is playing a joke," he said. "Maybe someone is reminding you not to work so hard." The next time I checked the paper chart for Bed 33, my initials had been signed under a time I knew I was on another floor. It was my hand, my loop on the arm, my careful C. I stared at it until the letters fuzzed. Miguel laughed when I showed him. "You forgot, that is all." I did not forget, and I did not like that my proof made me seem unreliable, which is its own kind of trap. I told myself to stop feeding it. Beds do not move by themselves. Numbers do not glow on dead screens. I straightened the sheets, and tuck the corners with the square-shouldered neatness Sister Agnes taught me. I wiped the rails with fresh wipes, even though they shone already. "Face the right way for me," I said, half a joke, half a dare. My voice sounded too loud in the room. It sounded like it did not belong to a woman who could be surprised anymore. At 2:03, during the storm's loudest flinch, Mr. Lin in bed 35 went missing. It was only 10 minutes, but it was enough for my stomach to cold sink. We found him standing by the wall of bed 33 with his forehead almost touching the paint. His eyes were open. His lips were moving. I do not speak Mandarin, but I know a prayer when the rhythm of it builds and falls like the edges of sleep. He did not respond when we coaxed him. He stepped backward like he was leaving a conversation, then seemed ashamed he had been caught. He would not confess who he had been talking to, which made the room feel lonelier than it had any right to be. I checked the locks again, in front of staff, to prove I was not inventing sounds. I pressed each brake until it clicked and wiggled the frame to show it held. We all watched for a breath. The bed did not move. I exhaled. We all laughed a thin little laugh because we needed to. When the others left, I stood still and listened. There it was again, softer for being sure of itself. Click. Something that knew I had just sworn it did not exist. If you were here, if you were walking this corridor with me, I would tell you the air is never neutral around a bed with history. There are dents in the wall from past collisions. There's a faint line where a headboard once lived and lived and lived. There's a draft that has no source because the windows are sealed and the vents are silent, but your forearms prickle like the hairs know better. What do your instincts do when the math does not add up? I caught myself glancing at the stainless cabinet, the one set at eye level for gloves and bandages. Its door has a little mirror polish that nurses use to check if their masks sit right. In the reflection, bed 33 kept looking like it had a shape on it, a dip in the sheets that smoothed when I turned around. Reflection is a liar, but it is also a kind of witness. I found myself speaking to the mirror because it was easier than speaking to an empty bed. Is there someone I should know? I asked, and maybe the room asked back by getting colder. Around 3 o'clock, the backup generator hiccuped. The main lights blinked off, and the emergency strips along the floor woke up with their low, submarine blue. Phones went to dead air. The storm was not kind to our transformer. We are trained for outages, but training does not prepare you for how sound changes when electricity leaves. Even the rainfall seemed to hold its breath. The monitors that had been off stayed off. The one by bed 33 hummed quietly and flashed 33 again, like a lighthouse that only counts its own coast. I should have called the on-call supervisor. I should have waited for maintenance. I should have done a lot of things that would have kept me surrounded by the living. Instead, I took a chair and set it beside bed 33. I told myself I would watch it until morning and then laugh about my dramatic streak. I pressed record on my phone for proof, but the battery dipped from 30% to 10 in a blink, then died like something in the room wanted witnesses to fail. That was the moment I realized I was making a choice I could not easily undo. The door clicked behind me. Doors in Ward C do not lock from inside. Ours are push bar for safety. The bar gave me a half inch and then a stubborn stop. The hall light showed my name tag reflected in the little window, reversed. I looked like someone else looking in. I knocked once for pride and once for fear. No one heard because the storm swallowed small noises. I sat back down because sitting felt more honest than pretending I could leave. The wheels sighed and the bed began to turn. It moved a degree, then another, slow enough that a skeptic could call it settling, steady enough that a clock could call in tension. The brakes were down. I saw the red tabs. The click I had heard before grew louder, now a deliberate sequence, like a familiar code tapped on a wall. 33 clicks would be a good story to tell. And if I was a storyteller by nature, I would say that is exactly how many there were. Truth is messy, eh? Truth is enough clicks to understand that something was unlocking itself without my permission. Why the wall? I asked. Why do you want to face the wall? I expected to hear the old building answer through its bones. Instead, the stainless cabinet whispered my name back to me, not with a voice, but with the shape of my mouth forming Clara on a face that was not mine. In the reflection, someone was sitting in the bed, Someone thin and patient, someone whose head tilted a fraction like a nurse making a note. When I turned, the bed was empty except for the weight of what the reflection had decided to show me late. I told myself another story to survive the next minute. Miguel had to be messing with me. Maybe he had signed my chart and thought it would be funny. Maybe he had put a magnet on the bed rails to mimic a break loosen. I held on to that because a human mistake is so much kinder than a rule I do not know yet. I called his extension from the ward phone. The line rang in the hall, muffled, absurd. He had left early. The supervisor had written it on the board. He had gone to see his mother out of town. There was a note about it by the time clock. The prankster was not in the building, which narrowed the joke. I pulled a chart for bed 33 because sometimes paper is heavier than fear. The last entry showed my initials again, neat and small, at 2:47. The ink was red. We do not use red ink. I traced the R. I found a slight leftward lean I make when I am hurrying. Then I saw something I had never seen before under my handwriting. A number in tiny script, faint as breath on glass. 33. If I pressed the page to the light, it shone brighter, as if the number was the source, not the paper. If I tell you I kept the chart too long in my hands, believe me. The storm hit a pitch that made the window frames sing. A draft slid across my ankles like someone kneeling to pray. I said, if you need something, tell me, because even fear has an ethical center that wants to be useful. The monitor flickered once. 33. The light in the cabinet deepened until the reflection had more weight than the room. I could see the outline of face now. The mouth did not match mine. It did not open when I did. It smiled when I stopped. It watched me with a patience that belongs to old habits, not new ones. Mrs. Alvarez started to cry softly in bed 31. The sound pulled me to the doorway. The door still would not yield. Do not talk to the woman, she said, voice hoarse from sleep. She is only kind if you lie down. Her eyes flicked from me to the bed as if I was standing where someone else belonged. The bed finished its slow pivot. Now it faced the wall, headboard pressed against the line where old paint met new. The rails felt colder than steel should be. The mattress gave a slight downward sigh, like it had found a familiar weight at last. There was a moment then, the kind storytellers stretch and shrink as needed. In that breath, I understood the shape of the trap. I had chosen to stay. I had spoken as if I was the one in charge. I had brought a chair to a bedside that had an occupant I could not chart. All that remained was the intimacy of proximity. The cabinet showed someone lying on the bed. My own hands in the reflection were tucking a blanket to a chest that was not visible in the room. The blanket showed a rise like breath. My hands on the rails felt a pulse that did not match mine. A voice came, quiet like the soft beeps of a machine you forget you have tuned out. This bed was mine before it was yours. The words were not in my ear. They arrived through the rails, through the cold that climbed my forearms. There was no anger in it. There was something worse. Possession is patient. It does not need to shout. I thought of how many people had slept here facing this wall for the last comfort of a repeat view. I thought of all the initials on all the charts that say who watched, not who was watched. I pulled the blanket off. It folded as if there had been a shape, and now there was not. The monitor pulsed one last 33 and darkened. I said the only prayer I remember from my grandmother. I did not say it well. The draft lifted from my ankles and rose through me like someone standing. I heard the wheels lock with a sharper click than before, as if the setting of a bone had finally found its groove. The door to the ward gave me a half-inch more, then another, then swung open with the reluctant courtesy of a sullen child. I ran the corridor with the chart under my arm, because proof makes panic look like professionalism. The supervisor met me at the desk with a face that asked me if I had slept. I handed her the chart and said nothing. She paged maintenance for the bed, because that is what supervisors do. She told me Miguel had texted a photo from a bus with his mother. He would be gone a week. My red herring went transparent and left me with my own outline, which was less comforting than I had hoped. By morning, fluorescent light made everything uglier and safer in equal measure. Day staff moved differently. They have the speed of sunlit work. Mrs. Alvarez would not look at the wall. Mr. Lin thanked me, for bringing him back to bed, though I had not. I returned to Ward C with coffee that tasted like burnt hope. Bed 33 faced the wall again. The brakes were still down. The rails were warm, as if someone had just pressed their hands there. The cabinet reflection showed a body-shaped dip that was not mirrored in the real sheets, which is a harder trick than any I have seen. The maintenance request form said the bed frame was fine. These old floors settle, they wrote, which is the kind of thing you write when you want to file something under gravity. The form also said the brake pins were newly greased. New grease does not make clicks. It softens them. I listened anyway for the old code and heard only the scrub of mops and morning voices. It would have been easy to fold the night into a story, then fold the story into silence, because silence is also part of the job. I signed out, finally, hands shaking enough to make the curve of my C wobble. The charge nurse handed me the chart I had left at the desk. "You forgot to complete this," she said. There was my signature again under the final hour of the shift. It was perfect, not the shaky one I had just made. It was written in red, the color we do not use, in a pen no one could produce. Under it, faint and sure, a tiny number rested like a heartbeat. 33. I felt something inside me accept a small part of the story, as if it had always belonged to me. I slept through the day and woke with the taste of cold metal. I told myself I would ask to be moved to another ward. I told myself a lot of reasonable things. At dusk, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number that began with the hospital's exchange. No text, just a photo. The stainless cabinet in Ward C, reflective door slightly ajar. If you pinch and zoom, you can see the outline on the bed and a figure in the reflection. Mouth tilted in a smile, "I do not dare return." The timestamp said the picture was taken at noon, when the ward was loud and safe, and when I was supposed to be far away. I deleted the message and emptied the trash, which is ceremonial and silly. The next night, when I walked past bed 33 with a tray, the bed was already turned. I could have asked for help to lift and fix it. I could have stood by the door and refused to enter. Instead, I went in alone. I put my palm to the rail. The rail gave me back a slow, patient rhythm that was not my own. "If you are here," I said, "do not hurt the ones who sleep." The room seemed to consider the bargain and then breathe colder, which might be consent if you have no better options. You want the neat ending, the clean answer, the fixed cause you can label and file. I want that too. The hospital offered a theory about old floors and draft patterns. A supervisor joked about prank ghosts to break the tension. Miguel sent a selfie with his mother holding a bowl of soup and wrote that hauntings do not respect time off. The cabinet shows what it wants in the hours it wants. The bed turns when it needs to face the wall to watch the person who watches. My initials keep appearing in red where I do not put them, which makes every future shift feel pre-written. Weeks later, Mrs. Alvarez was discharged. She did not look at the bed on her way out. She touched my arm and said, "It likes that you talk." I do not know if like is the word. I know that some things choose attention as a path into the room. I also know that ignoring a person can be its own cruelty. So I speak quietly when I pass bed 33, even when it is empty. I tell it the weather. I tell it the time until dawn. I do not tell him my plans because plans are a kind of invitation, and I am done inviting what I cannot protect. On my last night rotation before a long break, I stayed a moment longer by the wall. The reflection showed a figure sitting up, shoulders narrow, hands folded on the blanket in a shape that made my chest tighten. For a second, the mouth moved, and I thought I saw my own lips forming, "Thank you." Then the cabinet door swung a fraction as if something inside had shifted its weight, and the figure tilted its head at me in a way I'd come to recognize as a habit. The monitor, still off, flickered one gentle 33 like a goodbye, or a warning, or both. The morning staff found me asleep in the chair with my head tipped against the rail. They laughed in the kind way people laugh when they see the cost of a night. The bed had turned back toward the wall. The chart at the nurse's station had a fresh note in red that no one owned. The final image I took with me as I clocked out was a glimpse in the cabinet door. Someone sat upright in bed 33 in that silvered world, neat as a patient waiting for rounds, while the Real bed lay smooth and empty on our side. If you have a theory that does not make me part of it, tell me. Story 2. The elevator to floor -1. Sometimes the elevator opens its doors to a place the hospital swears was sealed decades ago, and if you don't step out fast enough, it decides for you where your shift should end. They hired me as an orderly because I know how to move through a building without making a scene. You learn quiet after you've already made one. My supervisor calls night shifts a second chance, and I wear that like a borrowed coat that doesn't quite fit. The basement smells like metal even when the mop water is fresh, and the cables hum like a low note you feel in your teeth. When the hum rises for no reason, I pretend not to hear it and look at the clock, which is my first mistake, always. We have 4 elevators, 3 for everyone, 1 for staff and supply runs. I learned their moods before I learned the nurses' names. The staff car's button panel goes B for basement, then 1 through 6. There's a sliver of hairline steel between B and 1 where the metal is smoother, as if someone removed a button and polished away the memory. It's nothing you'd notice unless the panel's light flickers, and tonight it did, winking like it had an eyelid. The light jittered, then slid into the empty sliver, like the panel wanted to illuminate a space that wasn't there. I told myself it was just an LED glitch. Then the speaker popped, even though no one had pressed call, and I heard a voice that wasn't a voice, only breath-shaping syllables. It reminded me of someone practicing a word in a language they don't know. My name didn't come through, thank God. Just a cadence like a lullaby practicing how to become speech. The number display on top of the doors ticked down from 4 to 1, then paused. The smell of rust grew sharper, as if the car had opened its mouth. The psych unit on 4 gives the best warnings. Not because they're true, but because they tell them in the tone you use when you've been right before. Tonight, a patient sitting cross-legged by the door said, "Don't take the elevator when the wall is breathing." I laughed because I am polite when my skin tightens. "The doors will open where no hall should be," she added, and I lost the laugh like a dropped coin. She held my gaze a heartbeat too long. "You can hear the wheels in there," she whispered, like a gurney no one is pushing. I had a simple job, which is always how these begin. Sterile supply crates from basement storage up to surgical on 5 before the 2 a.m. restock. If I did it early, no one would check if I had borrowed time for coffee later. I wheeled the dolly in, tapped B with my knuckle, and watched the panel stutter. The 5 light should have stayed asleep, but it pulsed once like it remembered a plan I hadn't told it. The gap between B and 1 caught light again, a thin pulse like an eyelid looking for a pupil, and the cables overhead answered with a groan that didn't match the floor numbers. Halfway down, the car jolted to a stop that made the crates clack like teeth. The doors slid open to cinder block and flaking paint. No floor indicator lit. I should have been staring at the basement hallway's silver tiles. Instead, I saw a corridor where the paint was bubbled like old burns, and a red line traced the wall at knee height where a gurney must have scraped it again and again. The lights in the corridor buzzed the way insects do when they tangle in a lamp, and the smell of iron tilted me back to the first time I saw a blood lab. I pressed door close like a woodpecker and did not breathe until the car snapped shut. I told myself I'd imagined the red line. I told myself I was tired and narrating my own fear because that is my bad habit. When the car reached B for real, I forced myself to look left and right and narrate out loud. Baseline hallway. Vending machines. Maintenance door with a yellow strip. It's a trick a nurse taught me after my last mistake. Describe what's real. I did, and felt better, which is how lies get brave. On the way back up, I ran into Lee from laundry. He looked like he'd sprinted a marathon without leaving the elevator. His hair stuck to his forehead. His rolling basket rattled like it had something alive in it. "Did you see it?" he asked, not caring what it was. He was shaking so hard the clothes hangers chimed. The doors opened, and it was dark but not dark, like the dark was close to my eyes. He held out his shoes as if proof for a smell. The rubber on the soles looked scorched, tiny blisters along the edge like they'd walked through a memory of heat. "Wiring," I said, because a lie could be a first aid kit. Generator feedback with the storm. The storm hadn't started yet, but the city grid was in that mean mood where traffic lights blink unison like a metronome no human set. Lee nodded like people nod when a line matches the shape of their fear. "Okay," he said, but his eyes kept slipping to the gap between B and 1. He rode the next car instead of mine, which is its own kind of proof. At 1:12 a.m., the stairwell's locked. It was in the email. Maintenance between 1 and 3 for new anti-slip treads. Use elevators only, the note chirped. I stared at the words while the cables hummed higher, as if the building itself had read the same line and grinned. My radio crackled, then died, then popped back with a burst of someone clearing their throat. "Jonas," it said, but clipped so tight it could have been static making my name. When I answered, there was nothing. The end of my shift at 6 a.m. felt like a country on the other side of an ocean. In a storage office, a maintenance log sat open like it had been waiting for me. I hadn't meant to snoop. I was hunting for a spare dolly strap. The top of the page read Elevator 2, Service Panel Key Missing. 3 dates circled. Today was one of them. Next to the last entry, someone had written "Do not cycle to sublevel without staff key." Under that, a second hand, smaller and meaner, had added, "Which key?" I caught my own reflection in the glass of the office door and didn't recognize the strain in my face. A missing key explains vandalism. Not voices, I told myself, and wished for something small enough to explain away. Deliveries waited. My supervisor would check timestamps if they were late. The supply crates felt heavier than this morning, which is a trick your fear plays when it wants to slow you down. I wheeled them to the staff car again. The panel blinked its bored little blink, then that sliver between B and 1 caught light like a fish back under the surface. I pressed the B button with 2 fingers this time, as if pressure could argue with gravity. The car shuddered and started down, not smooth, not working, more like sliding a couch across carpet. The speaker popped and whispered a shape that could have been hello if you squinted your mind. The cables hummed louder. Somewhere between floors I felt the car tilt 1 degree, then right itself as if it had considered another track. When the doors slid open, the hallway outside wasn't ours. The walls were scorched in streaks like a fire had licked its way along the seams. Old signage peeled away from paint, leaving shadows of letters. The red line at knee height led left into darkness and right into more of the same question. I could make out a sign half fused to metal. -1, it said, which is not a floor you can reach without a story. I should have thrown the crates in the hall and hid door close. Instead, I froze, as if the car were a stage and I had been called to hit my mark. The smell beyond the doors wasn't just rust. It was something wet buried inside metal, like breath condensed on iron and forgotten. A gurney will squealed somewhere in the dark, a sound like a small animal letting go, and my legs remembered enough fear to move. I slammed both palms on door close and said, "No," out loud like a prayer. The doors hesitated the way doors do when the sensor catches a shadow, then sealed. From the next floor up, the car shivered as if it had scraped against a memory on its way past. When the doors parted, the normal hallway felt cartoon bright, all the edges too clean. I pushed the carts out with a grunt, sweat gathering at the base of my neck in a line like a choker. The nurse at the surgical desk raised a brow. "You okay?" Her eyes flicked past me to the elevator as if the open mouth could answer. "Power is flaky," I said, and hated how light my tone sounded. She held the staff phone to the receiver like she could warm a call into existence. "Phones are trash," she sighed. "If the stairs are locked much longer, we'll start paging with paper." I pretended to laugh. I pretended all the way back in the car. That's the thing about pretending. When it works too well. I pressed 1 to go to the lobby and clear my head with a soda, and my finger landed between B and 1 like it had been invited. There was no button there. There was a seam. The seam gave with a soft, rubbery depression and lit up under my skin in a color that wasn't a color so much as a decision. The number display blinked, then showed a flat dash and a trembling 1 beside it. -1. The panel said, like it had been waiting for me to acknowledge a secret everyone else was being polite about. "Cancel," I said, and hit door open, door closed 2, 3, any number that meant witness. The panel ignored me with the patient dignity of old machines. The car sank. The hum became a groaning, a voice thrown in a trunk. The speaker breathed. The red line outside the doors arrived like a horizon emerging out of fog. When the doors opened, the air touched my face with a cool, damp hand. "Do you hear us?" the speaker asked, but not in a voice. In a way, the cables vibrated the metal under my palms. There's a point in every bad decision where you know you should reverse, and the reversal is already gone. I stepped out because stepping back felt like turning my back on a dog that hasn't decided whether to bite. The red line led left. I followed it because following a line feels like strategy. The tiles underfoot were the same pattern as upstairs, but stained a darker color that ran to the grout and veins. Door placards tilted at sad angles. Or 7, red 1, half melted at the edge. Another said records, the S drooping like it had given up last. I told myself I was there to document. That's what men like me do when we're about to dress fear as duty. I raised my phone. No bars. The camera app opened to a black preview that showed my own face only when I turned it around. I tried the flashlight. It glowed weak, then sputtered, the beam like breath on glass. 5 minutes, I said. You get 5 minutes inside the story, then you leave. Ticking clocks save people when nothing else does. At least, that's what I've told new hires when they stare at me like the basement should come with a map. The first door on the left had been propped with a triangular wedge long ago. The wedge had fused with the floor in a spill of melted plastic. Inside, metal tables lined up like polite soldiers at a wake. I didn't go further in. The smell was older there, a tang that made the backs of my knees itch. In the corner, something rasped. I will try to remember how to turn. The speaker above the doorway crackled without power and made a shape not unlike my name. I backed into the hall because pride is lighter than survival. There were charts on a wall rack. I tell you this knowing how it sounds. Paper doesn't outlive systems, not down here where water can bite it. But there they were, crisp under a skin of soot. I flipped one open because maybe the past will be kinder if you meet its eyes. The name at the top didn't belong to anyone I knew. The next did. Not because I knew the person, because I knew the handwriting. Mine. Buenas hade. Under it, the words admitted for smoke inhalation following sub-level fire drill malfunction. The date was wrong. The date was years before I worked here. The case number matched the format we stopped using 8 summers ago. My mouth went dry in a way that made swallowing sound loud. A little laugh bubbled up because sometimes your mind trips and lands on jokes to stay upright. I thought, good one, maintenance. Then I remember the log. Missing service panel key. Do not cycle to sublevel without staff key. Which key? It is easier to believe a human is cruel than to believe a building is curious. I flipped the next chart and the next. Every third or fourth was written in the same neat hand as mine. Not perfect copies either. Tiny variations in the way the J hooked, the way the H crossed like an indecisive bridge. I ran my thumb over the ink. It did not smear. It felt like frost. Behind me, the elevator door sighed and began to close. That simple, automatic gesture nearly dropped me. I lunged, hand out like a man trying to catch his last train. The doors paused, reconsidered, then rolled open as if a person had pressed door open from inside. "Thank you," I said because I am polite, even to metal. The speaker bled a sound like someone shushing me in a library. The red line underfoot had worn thin near the elevator threshold, scuffed to a pale seam. I wondered how many feet had made that mark on a floor no one admits exists. A shape turned the corner at the far end of the hall the way a cart does. Front edge first, body later. I could hear the wheel squeal before I could see what pushed it. Nothing pushed it. The gurney drifted as if the floor had a slope I couldn't feel. It moved to the red line and stopped, like a dogged heel, and faced me with its rusted rails open as if waiting to accept cargo. The overhead lights dimmed in a wave that ran toward me, and then receded, lit by some logic not built into our generator. "I can't help you," I told the hall, and wasn't sure who I meant. The elevator chimed once in a note lower than the ones upstairs use. The number panel over the doors showed -1 in a clean, digital red that made something in my chest tighten. You know that feeling when a song you used to love plays in a store, and for a second you panic, because you can't place the memory it belongs to? That is what the number did to me. It tugged at a thread I had lost on purpose. I wanted a map, so I made one with steps. 7 to the gurney. 4 past it to the split in the corridor. Right turn, 3 doorways. 1 says records twisted sideways. 2 says sterilization and looks like a typo of salvation. The 3rd has no name, just a window with crackled safety glass and a smear on the inside where someone once leaned a forehead. Maybe. I leaned mine in the clear space and saw rows of metal lockers with little squares for names. Dust softened their edges to kindness. On the far wall, a clock with no hands watched for a time no one could give it. I went back to the elevator because that's where people go when they're done pretending curiosity is courage. Before the doors on the floor, a footprint had bloomed in a film of soot. The tread matched my shoes, the left one that had a chip missing from the outer edge. I lifted my foot and set it inside. Perfect fit. The soot kissed the rubber like it had been waiting. Okay, I said to the no one who was enormous here. I hear you. Maybe that's what it wanted. Maybe hearing is a contract I should stop signing. The intercom whispered again, and this time I could almost parse a word. Stay. Not an order. An invitation. The hum and the cables pitched higher, a thread pulled tighter between floors. I thought about the 30-day review still hanging over my head. One more incident and I was gone. I thought about Lee's blisters on his shoe soles and how he had Googled how to explain to his kids why Daddy's shoes looked like they'd stepped on the sun. I thought about the patient on 4 who warned me with a tone that implied a debt. Then I did the thing that decided the rest of the night. I turned my palm and pressed it to the seam between B and 1. The panel warmed under my skin in a way metal doesn't. The door shut with a soft clap like someone polite wearing gloves. The car trembled once like a horse considering a rider and then began to rise, which made no sense. The number over the door didn't change. -1 held steady like a hell breath. The speaker stopped pretending to be static and let the breath become syllables. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything. It was the shape of a mother tongue I had never learned and would not be able to forget. When the doors slid open again, the corridor had changed the way the same room changes when you wake at 3 a.m. and don't recognize your own life. The red line was brighter. The gurney now sat on the far side of the hall, tucked neat like someone had put it away. On the wall where a directory plaque would be, a rectangle of clean paint waited. If I tilted my head, I could read the shadows of letters that had once been there. Burn unit, my mind supplied. Beneath, a smaller plaque shadow. Visitors must check in at 1. The idea that there had ever been visitors down here made my stomach go cold and tight. There was a supply closet to the right of the elevator. Its door sat crooked, like the hinge had poured itself a little into the jam and never regained its shape. Inside, an overturned bin of old ID badges gleamed under dust. The photos on the cards had fogged, faces blurring into generous guesses. I slid one up with my shoe. The name strip had bubbled and split, but I could make out John, and a last letter like an S or a 5. It was such a small coincidence, I almost laughed, and then the speaker above my head said my name in a voice like mine slowed down and echoed off tile. No, I said, and turned back to the car. If the doors had closed in that moment, I would have accepted it like punishment. They waited open, kind as a promise. I pulled one of the charts from the rack and held it to my chest like a shield. If I was going to bring anything back, let it be a bad idea on paper. The hum climbed until I could feel the fibers in my shirt tensing. The lights along the hall fizzed, then leaned into darkness like a field of wheat bowing toward a storm. The panel inside the car offered me numbers again. Real, clean numbers. Biddy, 1 through 6 dim, but available. I hit 1. The doors slid shut with a good obedient hush, and the car rose. My knees softened with relief that I knew better than a trust. When the doors opened, the main lobby stood there with its coffee kiosk and its green plants that pretend they aren't made of plastic. The security guard glanced up. Break already? He said, almost like the word break had another job tonight. I pulled the chart from under my arm, intending to confess so someone else could tell me to stop. The folder had turned black on the edges like toast left in too long. The paper inside had gone blank in patches, text sliding off into smeared shadows, except for the name at the top that remained neat and bright. Mine. It was dated in a hand I recognized from our old forms, the kind I practiced when I wanted to look competent. Under admitting nurse, the signature looped in a flourish I'd never manage. Under diagnosis, the ink had dragged, but the words were legible if I tilted the paper. Smoke inhalation. Exposure. Observed. Where do you find that? The guard asked, and his tone said he was only curious because that is his training. Records dropped it off. I lied and went to the vending machine for cover. Behind me, the staff car chimed. I turned because some reflex in me has been trained by years of elevator doors to look when they open. The number above it flickered once and showed -1 in a small, perfect red before clicking to 1. The guard didn't look up. People only see what fits. I finished my shift. It took every muscle not to glance at the scene between B and 1 each time. At 5:50, the stairwell door alarms chirped once as maintenance unlocked them. People began to move like morning had been handed around in paper cups. The psych patient who had warned me sat on the bench and smiled with her eyes closed. "Did you see the hall with no hall?" she asked, not opening them. "Did you hear the wheels where no one is?" "I got supplies delivered," I said, which was true in the way a bridge is true until the day it isn't. She nodded as if I'd answered the question she had meant to ask. "You should throw the chart away," she said, and then added, "But don't," in the same breath, which did not help. The sun made the lobby glass look like something to trust. I took the chart to the staff room and slid into my locker behind a sweatshirt and a lunch bag. My hands shook a little, an old habit I thought I'd trained out with repetition. When I shut the door, a ripple of metallic smell drifted from the vents, familiar now, like a cologne my father wore. I thought of calling facilities. I thought of calling in sick tomorrow. I thought of how the building hum follows you even when you carry your keys outside. At home, sleep wandered past and did not stop for me. Every time I drifted, the intercom whispered the shape of my name like a person practicing my vowels. I got up and made coffee with hands that didn't want to be glass anymore. My phone buzzed at noon with a number that seemed almost but not quite ours. The display showed the hospital exchange and then a new extension you would assign to a floor you did not plan to tell donors about. I let it ring. Voicemail didn't catch it. The call left nothing you could replay, only the taste of metal and a memory of the Redline scuffed thin near the threshold like a fuse you could follow with your finger. Back on shift that night, I found a small key on a loop of wire in my locker. Maintenance keys have teeth like a city skyline. This one was too smooth, just a blunt little tongue designed to press and turn and open something that does not want to be popular. A tag hung from it with neat block letters. Service panel too. I didn't put it there. When I curled my hand around it, it warmed as if I had been holding it too long. Maybe someone returned a lost key. Maybe someone decided I look like a person who keeps secrets. Maybe keys find their owners the way stray cats do. I haven't used it. Not yet. The stairwell doors work again. The generator purrs polite as a cat. The elevator panel shows B and 1 with their usual cheerful certainty. Tonight, the scene between them doesn't glow. Tonight, the intercom keeps its breath to itself. But every so often when I walk past the staff car, the number over the door will flicker from 4 to 3 to 2 and then settle on a dash with a shy little one hanging behind it, like a kid peeking from a hallway where he's not supposed to be. If you ride with me after hours and the doors hesitate too long at a floor that shouldn't be there, you'll feel me hold my breath with the building. If you ever hear wheels where no one is, don't follow the line on the wall unless you have decided what you will bring back. Bring back nothing, and it will give you something to fill the space. Bring back something, and you will owe it a return visit. I know this because the chart in my locker has developed a second page that I'm sure wasn't there last night. It shows a signature that could be mine or could be someone pretending with a good ear. Under disposition, it says observe. Under notes, a single line in red, stay with us. Now we move to the third story. Story 3, Redline in the chart in this hospital. Your chart doesn't record your life. It predicts your end, and it writes in red so you can't pretend you didn't see it coming. Aimemidi, first-year resident. The kind who triple checks doses and still wakes at 4 a.m. replaying decimals. My attending says I'm meticulous in the way people are when they're terrified of being wrong. He isn't wrong. Paper is the part one can control. Paper doesn't lie. That's what I believed until the night the records room breathed like a sleeping thing and the pens kept writing after the hands had gone home. The smell hooked me first. Dry paper with a sweet dust note, the kind librarians love, but sharper, like a copier warmed too long. The records clerk had gone. Small yellow lamp off, chair rolled neatly under the desk. I stepped in, thinking I'd make a dent in backlog and impress someone who signed evaluations. You would have done it too. The room rustled once without wind, then went still, as if it had decided to let me try. The first correction looked helpful. Page 3, patient M. Herrera, dosage adjusted in tidy red. Only we don't keep red pens in the unit. Too alarming for patients. Too final on a page. I smiled anyway because someone had saved me time, and I initialed in blue beside it to make the record clean. When I flipped back 2 minutes later, the red line had slid through my initials like a blade through ribbon. It wasn't crossed out. It was underlined with the kind of certainty that makes your mouth go dry. That's when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. A precise little rhythm from the far corner. Not plumbing, not a vent. The exact sound of the pen's cap posted, set down, lifted, set down. I looked and saw nothing but a jar of pens with their noses up. Nobody had bothered to lock the room because this is a hospital, not a bank. At least, that's what I kept telling myself while the tapping kept its patient metronome going like someone counting down. On the ward, Mr. King whispered, "Don't let them write me down." He had that silky delirium some fevers bring, the kind that makes a person's voice carry truths you wish were boredom instead. I told him no one decides that but the medicine, and I smoothed his blanket the way my mother taught me when she didn't want to talk. When I turned, the chart in my hand had a thin red underline beneath his name, so faint I could pretend it was a trick of light. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anyone. Maybe that was the first wrong choice, small and easy. By midnight, the pen tapping had developed a personality. It started when I opened the drawer with blank forms, paused when I sighed, sped up when I lingered too long on a page like it was impatient with my reading speed. A string of charts appeared on the clerk's desk that I hadn't placed there. Not stacked, arranged, as if someone had sorted them by the shape of my fear. At the top of the pile, a chart I didn't recognize, 1986 stamped in the corner in a font we don't use. The paper felt new, as if days were a coat it had refused to wear. I opened it because if you're going to be haunted, you might as well be specific. Red ink had underlined the patient's name with surgical confidence. Under attending, a signature I couldn't place. Under resident, my name. Emily Roth. A year that belonged to my parents, not me. I would have laughed then if the room had given me permission. It didn't. The tapping stopped for exactly 3 seconds, then resumed, faster. The pages of the other charts shivered, as if a breath had moved through them. That was when I decided to find a human. "Faulty toner," said the old records clerk when I tracked him down in the copy room, which would have been funny if I hadn't been afraid. He waved a hand at the air like he could fan away my mood. Interns pull pranks every July. Red Sharpies. Then they forget, and we throw the pens away. He waggled a metal drawer open to show me a neat row of blue and black ballpoints. No red. He pulled out one more drawer for effect. Empty. See? No red. Blame toner. I wanted to believe him, but toner doesn't tap, and it doesn't underline names that haven't been written yet. Back on the ward, the first prediction landed. Mrs. Alvarez in 12B, yes, the same Alvarez who whispers to walls on other nights, had a red correction on her vitals, a tiny rise in pulse, and a fall in O2 listed at 137. I glanced at the clock. 1:18. We were 10 minutes early for a scare that hadn't happened. I told myself some night nurse was playing prophet and would be embarrassed later. At 1:37 on the dot, the pulse oximeter dipped, and the room filled with that hush that lives between beep tones when you're deciding whether to call a code. I stabilized her. That part matters. We reversed the slide with oxygen and a small dose that I double-checked because my fingers had started to tremble. She was safe. She slept. I documented. And when I turned back to the chart, a neat red line sat under my new note as if someone had been waiting for me to finish the sentence before crossing it for style. The tapping from the records room returned, delicate and sure. like a teacher pleased with a slow student finally showing work. I did what you might. I chose not to sign the red line. I made a silent pact with myself to ignore anything in red unless it matched reality. That was my second wrong choice, bigger than the first. Because ignoring a map doesn't erase the road. Around 2 a.m., a colleague vanished from the station. Nina. She'd stepped down to imaging to check a scan. 10 minutes stretched to 30. We called her phone. Voicemail. We called imaging. She's not here yet. When we finally found her in the stairwell, she looked like she had been listening for something that never quite arrived. Did you hear it? She asked me, and without waiting for my answer, added, the pen. She didn't mean tapping. She meant a presence you can name only with objects. I took her back to the station, sat her down, pressed a juice into her hand. When I opened her chart to make a note, a red line had been drawn under her name with one word printed so faintly I had to tilt the page. Expired. We both stared until the word faded like breath on glass. She squeezed my wrist. Don't let it write me, she whispered, and I wanted a promise. But I have learned not to promise things I can't lift. I went back to the records room because if you want to confront a haunting, you go where it organizes itself. The lamp clicked on with a tiny resistance, like it had been turned off mid-breath. Papers lay in small, orderly fans, edges squared to the desk, the way I line up scalpels before a procedure. The tapping stopped when I entered, as polite as a person pausing when you open a door. I know you're a prank, I said, which is another kind of prayer. The drawer with the pens hummed under my hand, a mechanical little thrum that shouldn't have been there. When I pulled the drawer open, the jar of pens had changed. Black and blue stood like soldiers. One red pen lay across them, cap off, tip nicked with use. I hadn't seen it earlier. I don't think I had. I didn't touch it. I swear to you I didn't. It rolled on its own, a small shift like a fish easing in a bowl. Who are you? I asked the room because names matter, and the pages rustled in reply like a crowd trying not to cough. The door swung a half inch and clicked shut. Not a slam. Something gentler. The kindness that feels worse than anger. I'll admit the fear now. I was scared of being wrong. Yes, but more of being written. It felt like walking into a story someone else was drafting and realizing the character with your name doesn't get a voice. That's when I made the choice you will question, the choice I can't undo. I slid the bolt on the records room door, a spare lock we never use, and I said, I'll stay until dawn. I'll watch you write. It felt brave for a second. Then it felt like signing a form you haven't read. Time shrugged its shoulders. Minutes slouched. The room ticked with small noises like joints settling. At 2:41, the red pen lifted. No hand, just the pen, standing at attention as if held in an invisible fist. It tapped twice in the air to be sure I was watching, then pressed to a chart and drew a line with the steadiness of a pulse. I wanted to film it. My phone camera opened, then froze, then filled with static like snow on an old TV. I recorded anyway, because that's what scared people do when they pretend to be professional. The writing came faster. Little surgical notes where blanks had been. Corrections that made clinical sense in a way that thrilled and chilled me at the same time. It charted a lab value we hadn't drawn. Then the lab called to say they'd run it early by mistake. It adjusted a dose before I could reach for the formulary. It wrote, observe over and over next to names that didn't need it. Then the tone changed. The pen underlined names instead of numbers. Lines became sentences. Expired appeared in a faint, apologetic hand on 3 charts that belonged to people breathing just fine down the hall. The clock on the wall said 2:57. I took one step to the door, and the bolt refused me. My throat tasted like pennies. Stop, I said, and the pen stilled. It hovered an inch above my chart, which had somehow risen to the top of the stack. I hadn't brought my chart here. I never made one for myself. Residents don't have charts. But there it was, a manila folder with my name printed in someone's imitation of my own neat script. Emily Roth. Under it, a line drawn in red like a vein. 3:03 is the time nurses whisper about when they want to spook each other, the hour superstition likes. The clock's second hand seemed to speed up. The room's breath deepened. The pen pressed down and wrote a line. Just a line, long and even under my name. Then in a smaller hand that hurt to watch, letters formed. Expired. 3:03 a.m. I laughed. I did. A single, ugly bark that sounded like I had learned it from someone else. We don't do that, I told the room. We don't predict. The charts shuffled themselves with a storm's impatience and flung open to a page from 1986. The old chart again. My name under resident. A note in red that said observed writing. My chest tightened as if someone had cinched a blood pressure cuff 2 sizes too small. The pen tapped once, twice, then shot a red line across the page so fast I jumped. The overhead light flickered and came back grim. Paper lifted in a wind made of nothing. Pages fanned up and pinned my shoulders with the softness of wings that don't forgive. I couldn't lift my arms. The desk pressed at my hips. The room leaned closer. Why me? I asked, which is selfish and honest. The answer came in the only language the room knew. A cascade of paper, a hiss of pages turning, the dry whisper of fibers rubbing. You write what you fear, it said without words. You tidy because you want time to sit still. We adore you for that. The red pen circled expired on my chart, as if putting a heart around a crush in a school notebook. The second hand on the clock stuttered, then slid. 3:01. The tapping sped, a blur I felt more than heard. If you have ever decided something in a breath, you know how the body moves before the mind votes. I threw my weight backward and down, slumped to break the paper's grip, and slid under the desk. The pen swooped, missed, scratched a bright scar along the wood with a squeal like a violin gone feral. I kicked the drawer. It flew open and hit the pen. A red dot spattered my sleeve like a fingerprint. I grabbed the pen and snapped it on instinct, the way you kill a light by crushing it in your fist. Ink bled hot and sticky into my palm, too warm for logic. The tapping stopped. Not tapered. Stopped. The pages collapsed like a flock settling. The bolt on the door clicked on its own, or maybe my shaking knee jostled it. I don't know. I stood, ink dripping to the linoleum like tiny, stubborn warnings. 3:02 glowed on the clock with the certainty of a sentence. I yanked the door, ran the hall, and the hospital felt unfamiliar in the way your bedroom does when you wake and don't recognize your life. At the nurse's station, Nina looked up, eyes huge. "Your hand," she said, and I realized the red looked too much like blood to joke about. "Just ink," I said, which is technically true and emotionally dishonest. Mr. King's monitor chime then settled. Mrs. Alvarez murmured to no one and smiled at the wall as if it had told her a good joke. The overhead page system squawked a half-formed code and then thought better of it. I stared at the clock like a person daring a dog not to bite. 3:03 arrived. Nothing exploded. The world didn't fall. My heart made a noise I'll admit sounded like a sob dressed as a laugh. I didn't die. Not then. But the room had written the intention. And intentions are a kind of gravity. Morning peeled the night off the hospital. The records clerk found me picking dried ink from my palm, which flakes like rust if you're curious. He stared at the broken red pen in the trash, then at me. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, voice very small. I said nothing because some answers make other people part of it. "We don't keep those," he whispered, which I knew. He touched the pen with a pen. "Sometimes it comes back," he said, and I wanted to ask what he meant by it, but he'd already decided not to be helpful. Rounds were ordinary in the way a day can choose to behave while your brain keeps replaying a different hour. No one believed me when I tried to look honest and casual at the same time. The old chart from 1986 had vanished from the desk. The stack I'd intended to conquer looked smaller and smugger, which is not a word for paper, but it fits. I told myself to be normal until my shift ended. I told myself I'd sleep too hard to dream. I told myself 100 gentle lies to get down the hall without trembling. On my locker, a manila folder leaned against my lunch. I didn't put it there. I think I would remember if I had. My name on the tab, red underlined. Inside, one page. No past medical history. No allergies. No meds. Just a single red line under my name, and below it, the word observed. The date was today. The time block under disposition was empty, like a form waiting for a time to present itself. The ink was still damp enough to smudge. I closed the folder, slid it back, and pretended I hadn't seen it. Here's what I can tell you if you're still listening. Since that night, the pen tapping happens when I pass certain doors, the way a bird sings when you step under its tree. Red lines appear where they shouldn't, sometimes to warn, sometimes to prove they can. Twice the ink has underlined a name, and twice I've intervened so fast I felt like I was disrespecting cause and effect. Once the red line showed a future we avoided. Once it shifted to another name, like a current choosing a new shore. Choices echo. The first one, that decision not to tell Mr. King, echoes loudest. The second, that decision to lock the door, still rings. I talk to the room now the way you talk to a stubborn relative. Write in pencil, I say when I pass at night, and the pages whisper a refusal. Write gently, I ask, and sometimes the lines look thinner, which could be my need finding proof. If you think I'm inventing, I respect that. It's easier to walk a hall when it is only a hall. But if you ever hear a pen tapping where it shouldn't, don't promise anything out loud. The archive loves promises. It folds them into margins and fetches them at 3:03 like a house dog bringing a glove. The clerk swears no red pens are on site, and yet one way to my locker, most mornings cap off, tips stain a polite crimson that doesn't dry. I put in the trash. It returns, tucked into a bundle of discharge summaries like a thank you gift. I've stopped breaking them. I learned that lesson. Ink gets everywhere. It writes whether you help or not. So I keep the latest one nestled in a clear bag like evidence I will never show. The bag fogs from the inside in short little breaths when I bring it near the records room, as if something on the other side of plastic is practicing how to speak my name. If this sounds like a confession, maybe it is. Maybe it's a patient note written in a voice the charts have borrowed. I'm still here. I'm still writing. I still sign in blue because rules matter for as long as they matter. But sometimes when I turn a corner and the smell of dry paper licks the air, I feel the shape of that red line waiting for the rest of the sentence. And sometimes I think the archive didn't want me dead. It wanted me obsessed, which is another way of belonging. If you were in my shoes, would you stop reading? Or would you lean closer to see how the next line ends? Now we move to the fourth story. Story 4. Rounds at 3:03 a.m. Every clock on the ward froze at 3:03 a.m. The second hand stopped like breath held in a throat, and the hallway air turned cool enough to make my coat feel thin from the inside out. I am Dr. Harris, senior resident, which means I am the adult the night calls when it cannot find one. My reputation is built on routine. I believe in checklists, in a religion of small certainties. I have made fun of ghosts in the break room more than once. The ward at night smells like citrus disinfectant over old tape and coffee. The floors keep a faint echo that travels ahead of you like a scout. If you have ever walked a hospital at 2:59, you know the feeling that something is counting with you. If you have walked it when every clock decides it is 3:03, you know what it is to be counted. The first jump was so clean it felt like a magic trick performed politely for one person. 2:59 blinked. 3 o'clock never arrived. 3:03 settled in like a guest who does not explain how he got your key. The digital vitals monitors hit the same time. The analog wall clock in the nurse's station chose agreement. I made a joke about synchronized maintenance and told the nurse to note IT. She nodded with the slow smile of someone who has seen this show before. A small draft slid along my neck like a finger pressed to hush me, and I pretended it was the AC. I did what I always do. I began rounds. My clipboard was right where I left it on the station desk. It is an old habit to tap it twice before I start, like knocking on wood. When I lifted it, the first page carried my handwriting already, neat block letters, and the small slant I try to hide. Vitals, meds, notes, all filled for rooms I had not yet entered. The ink was my blue, the tone my clinical voice, the errors mine too. I stared at the signature. My name, my timestamp. 3:03. My stomach made that small, private drop it saves for elevators and bad news. Bed 12 watch me. Mrs. Grayson is the kind of patient who survives anything except boredom. She has a wit that only hurts itself on Sundays. Tonight she looked past me toward the ward phone and said, very softly, do not answer if she calls during rounds. I laughed too fast. "Who is she?" I asked, and Mrs. Grayson closed her eyes like she had told the weather not to rain. The phone on the desk gave a single soft chirp like a throat clearing. No incoming number, no message, just the idea of a call deciding whether to happen. The corridor lights flickered in a pattern I knew from childhood power cuts. First the strip above room 18 stuttered, then the one over the supply closet, then the one at the far bend where the mural of pastel fish pretends to forgive adults their mistakes. It was the same order the previous night, and the previous. I had not wanted to admit it. Routine can protect you until it becomes the cage. My pen touched the clipboard. Without looking down, I knew it would find a line already written there in my handwriting, preparing to remember what I had not yet done. I tried to break it gently. I reversed my route to prove a point, started with room 2 instead of room 19. The corridor still breathed cool against my neck. The analog clock above 2 did not care for my creativity. It had been 3:03 when I looked away. It was 3:03 when I looked back, the same angle of hands I would sketch without thinking. The patient in 2 slept with that small frown the sick share with children. Her monitor chimed the soft green pattern of ordinary. My clipboard recorded, in my script, a note that her O2 would dip in 6 minutes. I checked the connections and pretended the future could be bullied. 6 minutes later it dipped. Not to danger. Enough to make the note true. Enough to make me feel like a puppet wearing my own face. I adjusted her cannula because doing something is medicine even when it is sentiment. The intercom clicked, catching breath. The ward speakers make a thin paper sound when they wake, like a page being turned. I waited for a code or a name. The voice that came was a whisper that knew my syllables. It said Harris with the confidence of someone who has called you for years. It did not ask for anything. It only proved it knew how to reach me. My pager vibrated and then reset to the default time. The screen flashed 3:03, as if the device had decided to agree with the walls out of politeness. I tested the house phone. Dial tone, a patient long exhale. I dialed the operator. The line fed me my own breath back. The cold draft gathered down the corridor, thickening in the corners. Every loop of the lights arrived in the same order, like a conductor blessing the string section before the brass. If you have ever been in a room that remembers for you, you know how your memory starts to obey. The clipboard began to fill in bolder strokes. In room 7, it wrote mild agitation before the nurse called to tell me the patient in 7 was tugging lines. In room 14, it wrote, "Please recheck potassium," before I could remember why that admission had sounded familiar. I turned the page and found a line I had not authorized. Room 21, deceased at 3:03. We do not write that word so early in night. We do not write it before someone's chest speaks the language of decisions. I set the board down with a care that felt like respect or fear. I ran to 21. The door offered me the gentle resistance of a latch that likes to pretend. Mr. Fox slept. His breath carried the thin whistle of age and a heat that makes old men look like they are remembering a story. The monitor's numbers flirted with the edges, but did not cross. I stood there a minute longer than science requires because I wanted to send time a message. Then I did the thing the loop loves. I left the room. The overhead speakers cleared their throat again at the station. "Harris," the voice said, and this time the breath after my name shaped itself in a come. If you have ever been summoned by an empty line, you know how much the body wants to obey. I put my finger on the answer button and kept it there without pressing. The cold climbed the back of my neck like a hand that knows you from before. In the fish mural hallway, the same light failed in the same beat and made the fish look like they were taking a second to consider another sea. Breaking a pattern requires a decision you cannot undo. I made it at 3:03 when the voice said my name again. I did not answer. I set the clipboard on the desk and walked away from my route, down the back corridor past housekeeping and the night pharmacist who lives like a lighthouse. I turned circles in a supply room, counted to 50, drank water from the slowest fountain in the building, and came back expecting the time to have conceded. It had not. The wall clock still showed 3:03 with the cheerful rudeness of a child repeating a joke. The pages on my board had multiplied in my absence. There is a cost to resisting the rounds. Within 10 minutes, the sleepy patient in 10 bumped their 4 loose and began to cry in that ragged, hopeless way adults learn only under fluorescent light. The man in 4 coughed into a spasm. His body did not have the sense to exit. The nurse on call raised a brow that said, "Gently, we do this at 3:03, so small things stay small." I hate superstition, but I love outcomes. I took the board back up like a penitent after a private rebellion. If you have ever stopped at a yellow light for pride and rolled through the red for shame, you understand. At the end of the West Hall, a laminated sheet hung under the fire extinguisher. I have walked past it every night for months. I read it for the first time. Rounds at 3:03 are not optional. The font was official. The tone was not. Someone had written a smiley in the corner, as if that made orders friendly. I wanted to find the author and the year. I lifted the plastic and found pencil marks beneath, the kind people make when they trace, and the metal clamps prevent them from doing it clean. Under the traced letters, another hand had scratched smaller words. "Do not answer the first call." I followed the cold draft as if it were rope. It led to the bend where the fish pretend not to watch. The same bottle cap under the same chair. The same squeak in my shoe where the tile chips. The intercom breathed. The board offered me the next page with my notes, written in what I wanted to insist was my hand. 2 vitals I had not yet checked. 1 medication clarified with the kind of neatness I try to teach my interns. There was a new line at the bottom. Staff log. Harris. Expired 3:03. In pencil, so faint I had to tilt it toward the light. I scrubbed the pencil line with my thumb. It faded like stubborn smoke. Sometimes the cheapest red herring is also the easiest. I told myself this was a prank from older staff, a ritual to remind new doctors that humility keeps the count favorable. I pictured some attending years ago setting all the clocks to prove a point. I pictured maintenance laughing on a night with no real work. I pictured Nina from day shift adding my notes to spook me into kindness. The lie worked as well as lies do. It carried me 3 doors and 1 smile at a patient who needed only my face to believe the world softens after midnight. Then the code pager blared. Code in 21. The word deceased written before the sound may seem like a magic trick performed backwards. I ran because that is the only honest motion left when the ward asks. Mr. Fox's breath had stopped like someone had removed it with care. We worked him. You hope we always do. We did. We did until the monitor returned to the polite, flat line of a decision you cannot argue with. Time on the paperwork insists on numbers. It wanted 3:03. I put 3:07 because I'm stubborn. The nurse shook her head once with eyes that said, "Let the building have what it wants." Back at the desk, my pen had rolled off the clipboard and come to rest on the fish. The intercom was quiet long enough to call it courtesy. I made a choice then. If the loop wanted conversation, I would set the terms. I sat in the plastic chair that fits no one and watched the hands approach 3:03 again in a slow compliment to stubbornness. I told the night nurse my plan. She did not try to talk me out of it. She tightened her ponytail and said, with the care of someone warning you away from a step, answer the second call. Never the first. The air changed at 3:02 like pressure before a storm. A soft sound from the vents carried that clean cold that does not come from machines. The first call came, my name delivered like an inside joke. I let it ring. The second call came exactly as the big hand leaned to 3:03. I pressed answer and said, because the loop loves manners, Dr. Harris. The line did not crackle. It breathed. Then it said, in a voice that had borrowed mine and sanded it with time, Room 3. Room 3 belongs to the hospital. Every ward has a room like it. It changes function with budgets and bosses. Tonight, it held overflow beds and a hum like an old radio tune between stations. My clipboard held the door like a hand on a shoulder. Inside, the cold draft gathered itself into the shape of a patient habit. No eyes, no face, the suggestion of a gown, the outline of shoulders softened by light. It turned toward me. The intercom speaker in the ceiling said my name again, and the figure inclined its head like a senior nurse acknowledging a competent junior. On the bedside tray lay a chart, not a patient's. Mine. The tab spelled my name with the frankness of a label you cannot peel off. The first page documented what I was about to do. It described how I would step left because the right wheel of the bed catches. It noted the exact words I would use to reassure the figure that I would listen. It recorded, in tidy lines, that the clock would show 3:03 while I tried to read. At the bottom, a single line waited. Staff log. Dr. Harris. Expired at 3:03. I looked at the wall clock without wanting to. The hand had stopped obeying the usual rules. It was the same time it had been an hour ago. It was also moving. You may think I'm the kind of man who panics. I'm the other kind. I become very calm when the room insists on theater. I said, if you need me to walk these halls, I will walk them. But you cannot write that line. The figure made a motion like paper turning toward me. A draft stirred the corners of the chart. The intercom breathed in chorus across the ward, a soft, collective listening. The cold pressed at my skin the way gratitude does when it is shy. Then the clipboard wrote. It did not lie back and accept my refusal. It wrote in my hand, faster than I can, the next hour exactly as it preferred it. I watched the letters form the way a person watches a signature made in a different city. The more I resisted, the tighter the future became, like a knot nauseated by slack. I made a decision that was not logic. I put my palm on the chart and said, very quietly, we start with room 5, not room 19. We start with the hard conversation in 5, and we do not leave early. The figure turned its head toward the door, like a companion agreeing to walk your route instead. The draft receded down the hall, pausing at intersections. The clocks did not change, but my sense of minutes returned in small, nervous bursts. We went room to room. I spoke out loud to a presence I could not look at directly. I adjusted order of care and tone of voice. I lingered longer in the rooms where my board always rushes me. I did not answer the first intercom call when it came again, sweet as a trap. I answered the second with a hello that admitted rules without surrendering. There were consequences. When I moved against the pattern, small events tried to punish us. The 4 and 8 kinked itself like a rope. The printer jammed and grieved the longest paper snake I have ever coaxed free. A frightened husband stepped into the hall at exactly the wrong moment and asked me if time was broken, which is not a question hospitals train you to answer. But the outcomes refused to worsen. The man in 10 slept. The woman in 2 smiled in her sleep as if she had heard her name on a radio she trusted. And room 21, empty now, felt less like a mouth and more like a pause. Back in room 3, the chart waited. The final line under staff log had blurred. The pencil prediction softened like rain on chalk. The red ink that had appeared on other nights did not arrive to pronounce us. My hand shook then, not with fear exactly, but with an unfamiliar release. The figure swayed as if listening for a page I could not hear. I said thank you to Air because Air was the mannered host of this hour. The intercom answered with a soft click like a nod. I did not cheat the building. I left the clocks alone. I let it keep its 3:03. A bargain needs both sides to feel clever. The board still wrote where it wanted. The cold still toured the route like a veteran. But the staff log line under my name changed. It did not erase. It rephrased. Staff log. Dr. Harris. Rounds at 3:03. The rest of the sentence refused to arrive, as if the building itself had decided to leave me editable. At dawn, the story felt silly in my mouth. Light ruins a lot of good fear. The day nurse found me in the chair with my clipboard on my lap like a child sleeping after a tantrum. She asked if I had gotten any rest. I told her the truth in a way that sounded like a joke. She smiled the smile of a person with a home in the daylight. She peeled a Post-it from her sweater and stuck it to my board. Call IT about clocks, she wrote, and underlined it twice for comedy. I took the chart from room 3 to the station to sign and found it blank. Not empty, clean, as if the writing had decided to belong to the hour, not the paper. Only one note remained, written in a red that was not ours. Rounds at 3:03 continue. It did not sign itself. It did not need to. When I turned to hang the notice back, the fish in the mural seemed to be looking the other way. The last thing I saw before I walked in today was the row of wall clocks along the ward. One by the elevators, one at the station, one over the door to room 3. Each flickered just once in a ripple that moved like a breath across tile. For the day's shift, it read 7:01. For me, for that heartbeat, every face showed 3:03 in a small private grin. If you ever work nights and you hear your name on the second call, answer. If the first call comes sweet and early, let it go to the room that's been calling itself for years. Now we move to the 5th story. Story 5. The cabinet that smiled first in this hospital. Sometimes the reflection smiles before you do, and the cabinet waits until you notice, like a person who has been practicing your face in private and finally decides to show you how well they learned. My name is Lydia. Surgical floor nights. I have one bad habit everyone thinks is a good one. I smile. When the air goes thin in a room, when a monitor coughs, when the family watches me for answers I don't have, I put a polite curve on my mouth so the world thinks it still holds. The cabinets on our ward are polished steel. They swallow faces into soft ovals. I've checked masks in their shine 1,000 times without seeing more than tired eyes and a borrowed grin. Until last Tuesday at 2:11 a.m., when my reflection smiled first. I wasn't smiling. That is the part my brain keeps touching like a sore tooth. My face was flat with concentration while I counted gauze packs with my lips pressed together. In the cabinet door, the Lydia I didn't want winked into the smallest grin, a polite, practiced thing, and held it just long enough for me to doubt my own muscles. The lights hummed the way they hum when the night is full. The room smelled like alcohol swabs and lemon. My mouth stayed still. The cabinet's mouth didn't. When it dropped the smile, I touched my lips like a person checking for a stain. You tell yourself tricks. Stainless can warp. Fluorescents flicker. Humans misread. But the handle told a different story. The hallway air was cold enough to lift the hairs on my arms, and the handle was warm, not just room temperature, but warm like a hand that has just let go. I leaned closer and watched the oval of me bend. The reflection stayed one heartbeat out of time, just enough to make me feel like I'd arrived late to my own face. I laughed without teeth because I didn't want to test anything, which is how you know it had already tested me. 2 hours later, the scissors inside sat in a neat little curve I had not made, like a child arranging stones for a smile. The hemostats became eyebrows. Gauze squares, teeth. Whoever had done it knew our inventory better than new nurses do. I took a photo to scold the day's shift for jokes that walked too close to patient rooms. The photo showed a normal, messy cabinet. The curve of scissors was gone, replaced by the boring, practical chaos I was willing to defend. I deleted the photo and hated that it felt like something had been deleted inside me too. A patient tugged my sleeve at 3:01. Mr. Haley, pre-op bypass, the kind of man who apologizes for bleeding. Don't let it see your teeth, he whispered. His eyes were clear. He wasn't delirious. He looked past me to the cabinet by his bed, the one with the polished door we all use as a mirror. It likes teeth, he added, and turned his face to the wall the way old men choose one view and commit. I promised him I would bring warm blankets and cheer. I did not promise him anything about teeth because I didn't know which promise would keep. If you've ever worked nights, you know how attention behaves. It rushes toward alarms and forgets quiet corners. I started noticing the cabinet in quiet corners. I'd pass with a tray and catch my reflections gaze a fraction early. I drop my eyes to the warm handle and feel the heat throb faintly against my glove like a heartbeat in metal. The handle cooled when anyone else touched it. I tested that 3 times, reading thermometers like prayers. With the charge nurse beside me, it felt like steel. Alone, it remembered skin. I stopped telling people because every sentence I tried sounded like the air was getting to me. Don't open it all the way, Janine said when she caught me hesitating with the door, a hand's width ajar. She's been on this floor longer than anyone, the kind of nurse who can find a vein by listening. Take what you need with the door between you and the shiny. She said it like you say, don't pet the cat too long when the cat has claws. I laughed and asked her to tell me a story I could file under superstition. She shrugged. Pathology had that unit before they moved. They sent it up with a little note. The note burned in the microwave. Not my joke. In my head, I call what happened next beat one, like I'm narrating to a friend and want to sound controlled. The reflection started mimicking with a delay, then too early. When I raised my hand to the door, the oval in the steel lifted hers a breath ahead. When I opened my fingers, she held on longer, like she enjoyed the afterimage more than I did. I tried stupid tests. I stood still, breathed slow, blinked twice. The reflection blinked once, smiled, then I blinked. I whispered no, and she smiled wider, as if no were a private joke she'd been waiting for. I told you I smile. It's a habit that pretends to help. That night, the habit became a hazard. A family came up from the lobby with fear on wheels. I walked them to room 17, smoothed my face, and watched the cabinet's door catch my curve and keep it after I let it go. I closed my mouth hard and talked through my teeth like a villain, and the reflection's teeth showed brighter, a flash of white more teeth than the architects of my mouth ever ordered. When the family left, I put a strip of tape over the cabinet, like a person covering a mirror after a funeral. The tape peeled itself back with a soft little sigh, and the door shone again. Beat 2 began with proof I should have wanted. Janine saw it. We were turning a patient gently, the way you turn a book you love. The cabinet faced the wall, so there was no chance of trick. The polished edge caught us. I watched Janine's head tilt toward the reflection the way a dog hears a frequency you can't. Her hand tightened on the sheet. "Don't open it all the way," she said again, voice low, eyes on the door as if it could hear. "Whatever you do, don't let it match you exactly." She wouldn't look at me after. She wrote her note and left for a code on another floor, as if she had used up the words she could afford. At 423, the cabinet showed me standing in the hall while I was across the room. The reflection had stepped back 5 paces from my body and was looking in from the doorway. I could see my shoulders from behind, my hair, the angle of my feet. My breath went shallow, not in fear exactly, but with that oddness we give to dreams in the first minute after waking. I turned slowly, expecting to catch a coworker who would grin and say, "Got you." The hall was empty, just the hum, the long line of floor, the clock practicing its minute hand. In the door, my not-me grinned, patient as a teacher. The night decided to be helpful in the most unhelpful way and threw the floor into a partial outage. The emergency lights woke with their submarine glow. The polished steel reflected that thin blue like a lake catching moon. Monitors blinked politely on battery. The cabinet seemed brighter in the dark, which is a sentence I'd like to refuse. Janine and the others peeled off to help with codes and battery checks. I stayed because the pre-op bay had 2 patients and the surgeon prefers it stocked like a ritual. The handle of the cabinet warmed under my glove, and in the hush, I could hear what I had pretended not to. A soft, regular tapping from inside, like a fingernail against a jar counting. Vorne ist die vertikally in a blackout. The little bar sighed down. My radio crackled and then caved. I spoke into a deadline because talking is one way to claim space. I just need 4 suture packets and 2 butterfly strips. I told the cabinet the way you tell a dog you're taking the leash. The reflection lifted its hands to the handle first. I lifted mine after, because pretending I wasn't following had become obvious even to me. The door gave at the top and held at the bottom. It didn't open far. It opened exactly to the width of a person invited and no more. I don't want to tell you how familiar the warmth felt. A palm, a cheek, the heat of a breath trapped and returned. I took the suture with my eyes on the real shelf, while the reflection took something on the reflected shelf I couldn't see. The scissors inside had rearranged themselves again. This time, they formed a smile that didn't fit a human face. Too wide. The gauze squares made small squares of teeth that went back too far to be practical. At the corners, 2 hemostats tilted like dimples. It was funny if you refused to look. If you looked, it wasn't funny at all. I did a thing stress tells you is reasonable. I tried to explain it away with math. Steel can warp. Lighting can lag. There's a known delay in fluorescent flicker rates, and the eye fills gaps like applause. The day after, I could have written you a paragraph about parallax distortion that would have earned a gold star in some forum where men with usernames correct strangers. At 4:37 a.m., those sentences were made of sugar. They dissolved when I put them in the mouth of the night. Because the items inside the cabinet had made a smile again, and I had stocked that shelf last, and I had not made a mouth with hospital tools. In the back of the cabinet, where the shadow sits like a guest, a little metal tag dangled. I tugged it free with gloved fingers because bad ideas feel safe when you're wearing PPE. Pathology, the tag read, stamped in little hospital letters. Transferred 2003. Below, in pen that had faded to a pale scar, someone had written, "Do not open fully." I thought of Janine's voice. I thought of the note that supposedly burned in the microwave. I thought of the warm handle pulsing like a neck. Okay, I told it, and that is the moment I agreed to a contract I did not read. The red herring came, wearing a white coat. A junior resident passing through saw my face, listened to my summary, and offered me a neat dismissal tied with a bow. Pareidolia, he said, mispronouncing it the way smart people do when they've only read it. Pattern making, stress. Reflections pick up the fastest moving parts of an image and predict by a millisecond. Your brain catches the prediction. Love the brain. He patted the cabinet. The handle stayed cold for him. When he walked away, the reflection smiled at his back with my mouth. It was a mean little smile. I have never smiled like that at anyone, which is how I learned what it wanted. By then, the items inside had arranged themselves into something beyond jokes. A row of gauze pads, 7 of them, lay in a neat arc. On each, a dot of iodine had been placed dead center, like pupils. They watched the doorway. The scissors split to either side, made parentheses. The whole pattern read as a face, a set of faces, offering attention to an entrance. Offerings, I thought unwillingly, like a child emptying pockets for a pet that doesn't sleep. The warm handle pulsed twice, and the reflection leaned closer as if to smell me. Here is the choice I made that took away the rest. I opened the cabinet wide. I did it fast so fear wouldn't slow my hand. The door leaped that last inch like a dog breaking a chain. The bottom hinge groaned and shifted. The door jammed near its apex with a sound like a bone seated too far. Metal met metal and refused to undo itself. I stood with my fingers flexed and the door yawned open like a mouth expecting dentistry. The emergency lights painted the inside darkness a deeper blue. The tap-tap inside stopped. Stopping is sometimes worse than continuing, isn't it? Okay, I said again, because people say okay to empty rooms when they want to be perceived as calm. The reflection did not say okay. It widened its grin very gently, like a teacher rewarding a student for naming shapes. Teeth appeared where there is only supposed to be shine. Not the white comic book teeth of Halloween. Many, small, precise, as if the mouth had run out of face and decided to continue inward. I kept mine closed. Mr. Haley's warning vibrated like a string in my skull. Don't let it see your teeth. I lower my chin the way you do when you're done with a fight and finish before it starts. It moved toward me while I did not move. In the reflection, I took a step I did not take. My hands lifted to the door a half beat before mine did. My shoulders shifted to make room for someone else's purpose. In the steel, I breathed fog onto the inside of the glass. On my side, the air stayed cold and clean. The difference told the truth. It was not copying. It was waiting to replace. If you've ever stood by a lake at night and had the sudden certainty that if you leaned 1 inch too far your reflection would take you, then you already know the story my bones told my brain. I had to choose how to be taken. Smile and invite it, cover my face, and hope it wanted an open door more than a mouth. Run and leave the door open until morning so anyone could walk past and catch a grin they didn't own. Choices under a clock feel like needles. The generator had 30 minutes left if the last outage taught me anything. My shift ended at 7. The cabinet had all night, all years. I pulled a strip of steri tape and crossed it over my mouth like a child mimicking a hostage scene. It sounds silly. It was smart. Whatever learned my face learned from the teeth first. The warm handle throbbed again, impatient now, like a pulse at a wrist you've held too long. A draft gathered low, an air that was not air but the absence of light, pooling inside like an emptied sink. The reflection's eyes were my eyes, and not. The lids didn't blink. When I lifted my hand, the reflected hand lifted first and kept lifting after mine stopped, fingers reaching a curiosity beyond my wrist. I snapped a pair of hemostats shut on the lip of the door, wedging it with a clamp. The steel screamed a little song at that pressure, a sound like feedback shoved through a straw. The grin in the steel held steady and then quivered with a micro tremor of annoyance, which is a ridiculous thing to assign to furniture, and true. The cabinets inside darkened. It wasn't shadow, it was depth. The emergency light swallowed into it without a reflection. I saw nothing, and the nothing looked back. I felt that look on my molars. The gauze pads with their iodine pupils turned from the doorway to me, with the faintest shift a square of cotton can manage. I thought of offerings and of mouths, and of the way blood leaves scent on steel. I reached in, because sometimes disaster wants a handshake. My glove met a pressure that wasn't a shelf. Soft, then firm. Something like a cheek learning shape against my palm. A laugh tried to crawl up my throat and failed, muffled by tape. The reflection laughed for both of us. It showed my mouth open in a soundless arc and my teeth in a row I do not have. The grin crept toward the hinge, toward the edge where mirror meets air. I grabbed the nearest thing I could turn into a warding symbol. A roll of tape, a pen light, the tiny plastic clamp that keeps 4 lines honest. I set them in a line on the shelf like a border. The items inside rearranged themselves with the patience of an old friend making room. Smile became fence. Fence became mouth closed. The building breathed. The generator coughed and caught. The emergency light dimmed 1 degree and then held like a person choosing not to faint. The reflection's grin faltered. Not because of my bravery, because of the clock. The tiniest thread of dawn had begun to stain the far end of the hall, the color the sky makes when it wants to be a bruise and a mercy at once. The cabinet doesn't own that light. It respects it the way animals respect a fence they've never tested. The handle cooled under my hand by a single shy degree. I tried the hinge. It refused, but without malice now, the way stubborn doors do after a house settles. I kept the tape across my mouth until the first fluorescent bars shivered back to life, and the hallway replaced the hush with hallway noises. Pagers yelped their morning to-dos. Someone laughed the way you laugh when your coffee finally arrives. I sat on the stool beside the cabinet like a dog you find at dawn by a gate it's guarded all night. Janine found me there. She saw the hemostat wedging the door, saw the pattern on the shelf, saw my taped mouth, and did not ask the wrong questions. She unhooked the clamp and closed the door with a careful, silent push. "Let it be," she said gently, like you speak over a sleeping baby. Day makes you lie, or at least makes the truth look dramatic. I let the tape hang loose at my neck and told the day's shift there had been a slight hinge issue. Maintenance put in a request. Someone wrote pathology on the line that asks which department last touched this asset, because the computer remembers what we don't. I stocked the cabinet like a person returning objects to their gods. I left the scissors in an honest pile. I didn't make a smile or a fence. I tried very hard not to think about teeth. Before I clocked out, I checked inside one last time. You would have too. A single item lay on the middle shelf that did not belong in any inventory. My ID badge. The clip had been torn as if impatient fingers had taken it without looking. In the photo, my mouth used to be a professional little line, the smile I put on like a mask. Someone had scratched the plastic until the line curved. The new smile followed the shape I saw in the steel. Wider. Too many teeth sketched in with a dull edge. I held the badge in my palm and felt the heat of a handle I wasn't touching. I keep expecting the resolution, the lecture, the fix. That's how we tell stories. We send in maintenance. We replace the cabinet. We give the audience a policy about reflective surfaces. We didn't. The cabinet stayed. Other nurses started using the next bay's tools more, in the way you begin to orbit something without admitting it has gravity. Mr. Haley went to surgery and came back with a good color. He still turns his face to the wall when I pass, but now he taps the bed rail twice as if to greet whatever walks with me. I learned to talk with my eyes and my hands. I learned to keep my mouth soft and closed. Every few nights, the handle warms just enough to make my glove feel like a barrier and a permission slip. I do not open it wide. I take what I need through a civilized gap. In the reflection, my not me has learned patience. She stands exactly where she would, does exactly what I am about to. Sometimes she lifts a finger, as if asking a question in class. Sometimes she waits with a smile she is very proud of. If you see her, if you ever stop by the steel to fix your mask and catch a grin that doesn't belong to you yet, don't let it see your teeth. It is learning your bite for a reason. On my lunch break, I try to replace my badge. The machine spat out a new one with a clean, polite photo. When I clipped it to my shirt and walked past the cabinet, the reflection showed the old one still, the one with the scratched-in grin. My fingers flew to the plastic, certain I'd mixed them up. I hadn't. The real badge was new. The reflected badge smiled, like a person who knows a different future. I covered my mouth with a napkin and pretended I was warming my face. The reflection laughed without sound and turned away before I could find my own eyes. If you come to our floor and you need something from the cabinet, I will get it for you. I will hold the door between you and the shiny, and I will hand you whatever you ask without asking you to lean close. That will look like kindness, and it is, but it's also selfish. I don't want it to learn your teeth. I don't want it to practice your mouth sharp. It has mine. That is enough for now. The hinge sighs sometimes when I walk past, the way a house sighs when someone it knows comes home. Last night, a new nurse laughed at my caution and opened the cabinet too far before I could stop her. The hinge stuck and then eased forgiving. In the reflection, two Lydias stood behind her shoulder, one with tape over her mouth and one with a neat, white smile. The new nurse didn't see. She took what she wanted and left smudges in the shape of crescents on the steel. I wiped them away with more care than they earned. The cabinet warmed under the cloth like a pet waking. I whispered no, soft enough to pass for a sigh, and the reflection held my gaze without blinking, as if trying to choose a mouth. Morning came calm and honest. Janine signed out with a tired little wave. Maintenance still hasn't fixed the hinge. Maybe they did and the cabinet preferred itself. Maybe the request never made it through the system because the system recognizes who edits it. I walked down the hall with my head at that slight angle you get when you're listening for a sound you don't want. The emergency lights were off. The fluorescents kept their promises. The steel kept mine. If anyone asks me why we keep it, I'll tell them the truth people can hear. Budgets, waiting lists, asset transfers. The tag says pathology. The tag says 2003. The tag says do not open fully if you tilt it against the light. But if you're still here, if you're listening with the kind of ears the night grows, then you already know the real answer. We keep it because it keeps us, it keeps the tools, it keeps the habits, it keeps the hour between fear and relief where work gets done. It keeps a version of me who smiles first and waits for me to catch up. And when I walk away, when I am across the room stocking gauze for someone who will thank me without meeting my eyes, the cabinet door catches a slit of me. In that thin silver, Lydia stands beside the closed door, mouth a polite curve, teeth neat and counted, waiting. She does not follow when I leave. She does not fade when I return. She holds her smile like a promise she expects me to keep. If you have a theory that doesn't include my reflection, keeping a schedule, I don't, tell me. Until then, I will keep my mouth soft and closed, and I will not open the cabinet all the way, and I will leave a little space in my day for a grin that begins without me. That was the last of tonight's 5 hospital horrors. From beds that turn themselves in the night, to elevators stopping at floors the living don't remember, to charts that write in red, to endless rounds at 303, and finally, a cabinet that smiles before you do. Every story tonight whispered the same warning. Not everything in a hospital is there to heal. If you made it this far, you've walked the halls with me long after visiting hours. Which of these tales stayed with you? Which detail made you glance at the nearest reflection or watch the clock a little too closely? Tell me in the comments. I read every theory. If you enjoy wandering with me through these shadowed places, let me know by leaving a like and sharing this video with someone who doesn't scare easily. And remember, The next time you find yourself in a quiet ward at night, don't trust the clocks, don't smile at the reflections, and never, ever answer the first call. Sleep lightly if you can.